in reality, what this is, Cenk, the state-sponsored mass rape. That's what it is. It's not just forced marriages. It's the state-sponsored mass rape of our women. And when it comes to our children, I mean, not only are they forcing our children to, forget their culture, their language, their identity, they are forcibly separating our children. Again, the Chinese government's own data shows that up until 2019, they separated over 890,000 Uyghur children and put them up in so-called state-run orphanages and boarding schools. And if you look at the few journalists that were able to get anywhere near these facilities, that there's police forces and security forces, Chinese security forces, preventing them from coming near this. And there's high walls, barbed wires, and even watchtowers. So essentially, what it is indoctrination camps for children.
All right, now we often talk about the genocide going on in Gaza because it's so heartbreaking and on all of our screens right now. But there's another genocide going on in the world, and that's the Uyghur genocide or Uyghur genocide in China. So we've brought on someone who is the foreign and security minister of the East Turkestan government in exile to talk about it, Salih Hudayar. Salih, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Cenk?
Good, good. So, Salih, you're in America, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. Okay. So I'm going to ask you about the genocide, and then I'm going to ask you about the government in exile because I'm very curious about that, and then begin to understand how there's a way to make a difference. Okay. So first of all, for the folks who don't know, who are the Uyghur people in the first place?
So the Uyghurs are an ethnically Turkic people who have been living in Central Asia for thousands of years. They are based mostly in East Turkestan, which is the Turkic homeland. In fact, it's the cradle of Turkic civilization. Historically, East Turkestan has been independent, but in the late 19th century, the Manchu-Qing Empire conquered East Turkestan and annexed it as Xinjiang, or meaning the new territory or the colony in Chinese. In the 20th century, we declared our independence twice, in 1933 as the East Turkestan Republic before Soviet intervention, and then again once more in 1944 until 1949 when the Chinese communists invaded East Turkestan and has been occupying it since.
Yeah, so of course, a lot of people who watch the show know that my last name is Uygur. That's how we pronounce it here in America. But in Turkey, it is pronounced Uygur. That is the Turkish and Turkic way of pronouncing it. And you might hear it in the American press as Uyghur, the Uyghur people in China, but it's all the same thing. It's Uyghurs. Now, I am not ethnically Uyghur, but the reason why my last name is that is because in 1923 in Turkey, everybody had to pick last names as part of the modernization from Ottoman Empire to the Republic of Turkey. And I say all of this because to back up what Salih said about how Uyghurs and East Turkestan is the cradle of Turkic civilization, because that's why my family picked that name, because the Uyghurs were the first Turks that created language, and their language was used in both the Mongol Empire and the Chinese Empire. So it has a deep, rich culture and values education. It's a beautiful culture. So as you just heard there, it was taken over by China, and you know that it's taken over when their version of the name is the colony. So thereby indicating not part of us, but something we just took, right? So now that's been the case for a while, and the Turkic people there want independence. Of course, China doesn't want to give them independence, but lately things have gotten much, much worse. So, but before we get to the much worse, actually, you left when you were 7 because of oppression and moved to America. So what was the oppression you were living under back then?
So, especially after the fall of, since China occupied East Turkestan, it's been engaging in a broad campaign of colonization and forced assimilation. And then with the fall of the Soviet Union and the independence of the Turkic Central Asian states, this gave hope to our independence for our people. And so you had more political and social activism across East Turkestan. And China feared this, so they began to engage in a what they call the Strike Hard campaign, in a series of Strike Hard campaigns that essentially laid the groundwork for the ongoing genocide that we are seeing today. So they began to mass arrest tens of thousands of people. They began to curb our religious and cultural activities and practices. And so a lot of people, anyone that the Chinese government, anyone who resisted assimilation, the Chinese government began to label as so-called separatists and ethnic nationalists. And again, this is mined before 2011, when China began to use the global war on terror to just blanket, to use the so-called fighting against terrorism narrative. So my father fled in 1995, and he ended up in the U.S. in 1998 as a political refugee, and then we were able to reunite with him in 2000.
Okay, so yes, America and Israel have taught the whole world and all of the autocratic governments that you label all of your enemies terrorists, and then you're done with it. Then they're the eternal bad guys, and you're such an angel for fighting back against them, from speaking their language. Wow, seems very terroristic. All right, now let's talk about the horrors that have ensued since then. Tell us about the camps and tell us about what they're doing now.
Well, so the Chinese government actually began to lay the foundations for the camps as early as 2012, 2013. If you look at Google Earth and look at the satellite imagery analysis of many of the camps that are present today, they started clearing the fields to build these camps. So in 2014, China launched the so-called People's War Against Terrorism. That's what they call it, which is the euphemism they use to describe the ongoing Uyghur genocide. So they began initially arresting men, between 15 and 45. Then by 2016, they expanded it to our entire population, to where anyone who had previously engaged in any religious practices, anyone who had contacts with anyone overseas, including my own relatives. Over 100 of my relatives were taken into the camps, and that was the sole reason, is because you had contact with so-called foreigners or anyone who had traveled abroad. The Chinese government, they have a list of like 70 plus reasons why you have to be re-educated. So essentially, they called it as re-education camps, but in reality, it's concentration camps. In these facilities, our people are being tortured. They're being forcibly medicated. They're being forcibly indoctrinated. Many of our young and healthier ones are, getting screened and taken and disappeared at night. And many people think it's for organ harvesting. The Chinese government in itself stated that between 2016 and 2017, that they collected the DNA samples, voice prints, and retina scans of 36 million of our people in East Turkestan between the ages of 12 and 65. Initially, the Chinese government denied these camps and stated that they were for vocational training and education. Then, as the international community by 2020 began to pay attention, China released a white paper stating that these were, again, vocational training centers, and that they were uplifting Uyghurs from poverty, providing them jobs, and teaching them the Chinese language, and that they had sent 1.29 million people per year between 2014 to the end of 2019, or roughly 7.8 million people, into this concentration camp system. And that doesn't include the millions that are, that have been given, according to Chinese judicial data, over 578,000 Uyghurs are serving anywhere from 5 years in prison to life in prison for various crimes. And we don't even make up, East Turkestan doesn't even make up 2% of the total population of the areas under the control of the PRC, yet we have over 33% of the prison incarceration rate.
So, unfortunately, there's a lot of telltale marks of each of these genocides, and you see, the pattern repeating itself. So you take a different minority group. So in this case, it's Turkic people that are not ethnically Chinese. You isolate them, and then you occupy their land, and you call it either a colony or an occupied territory, right? You take away their rights, and if they dare speak up or just even speak their own language or even pray in a way that the government doesn't like, you put them in a concentration camp and call them terrorists. So in your case, the American government has officially recognized it as a genocide. And you were a part of that. You talked to Senator Cornyn and Mike Pompeo at the time. So tell me about how you got the US government to call it a genocide.
Well, we started initially in 2017 in Oklahoma. That's when I first started reaching out to Senator Lankford's office. And I actually met with him a couple of times to press our issue, to get him to introduce a Uyghur Policy Act similar to the Tibetan Policy Act, and to initiate US policies to address the crisis. Then I moved up to Washington, D.C. in August of 2017 to advocate for East Turkestan. And with like-minded other young Uyghurs and Kazakhs, we founded the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement, or now known as the National Movement, to advocate for an end to the genocide, to advocate for recognition of the genocide, end to genocide, sanctions against Chinese officials and entities, and ultimately addressing the root of the problem, which is Chinese colonization and occupation of East Turkestan, to advocate for our people's right to national self-determination and ultimately independence. Initially, the U.S. government was very slow. They were very skeptical in the sense that they didn't. It's not that they didn't know what was happening. It's just that at the time the U.S. was trying to engage in a trade deal with China, so they don't want to really upset China. But with continuous public advocacy and meeting with members of Congress, we were initially able to get Senator Cornyn and others to introduce legislation to recognize the genocide. And shortly, we repeatedly pressed the State Department to recognize this genocide. And finally, right before the first Trump administration's initial term ended, we held a rally in front of the State Department and delivered a letter to Secretary Pompeo urging him to make it his legacy. And so on the last day, they recognized it as a genocide. But despite the recognition, there has been no meaningful action. In fact, both the incoming Biden administration reaffirmed the genocide recognition, but no meaningful action has been taken. Our people continue to be interned in these concentration camps, in these prisons. Millions continue to be enslaved across factories inside East Turkestan, and China is now transferring Uyghurs out of East Turkestan into Chinese provinces. There's new reports stating that the Chinese government has plans to expand organ transplant facilities, which are essentially organ harvesting facilities across East Turkestan.
Yeah, so in America, sometimes you hear some wives' tales about people taking your kidney and stuff like that. But in some places in the world, they are not wives' tales. It happens, and I mean that is just absolutely brutal when you're harvesting organs from live human beings, because they're a different group and they're a minority, etc. So, and it's so hard to know how much they're doing that. Because like Israel, they're not going to allow any journalists in there, right? There's not going to be any reporting there. So tell me a little bit more about, do people ever make it out of the camps? And what do they say if they make it out of the camps?
Well, the few people that have been able to make it out of the camps and out of East Turkestan are people who have either dual citizenship or whose whose husbands or wives were citizens of other countries. So they were either citizens of Kazakhstan or Pakistan, and because of that, they were able to get out, or of other countries. Whereas the ones that are coming out in East Turkestan, many of them are dying within several days. As soon as they're released, several days later, they're dying, and they're coming out in a vegetable stage. And if you look at pictures of starve people. That's the type of images that have been shown of Uyghurs that are coming out, but they're dying after they come out. That's the sad things. And China officially claims that it shut down the camps and that now they have provided Uyghurs with jobs and they're sending them to to secure jobs inside Chinese provinces. What they're really doing is they're trying to alter the demographics and slowly ethnically cleanse East Turkestan out of our population to make us an actual minority. Because in East Turkestan today, we are still the majority of East Turkestan's population.
Yeah, I want to get to those forced marriages in a second too. So, by the way, if the Chinese government disagrees with anything we're saying on this show, happy to have a representative come on and debate Salih Hudayar or another representative of the East Turkestan government in exile. So now, do you get to talk to your family that's left in East Turkestan, or is that become impossible now?
No, unfortunately, since really the summer of 2016, 2017 was the last time I was able to communicate with anyone. In fact, it was my grandfather who warned me. When we spoke with him, he said, "Don't call me anymore. I don't know you. I'm too old to go to school. Leave us alone." And the school, again, is the euphemism for the concentration camps, because again, what does China call it? These are vocational training schools. We're training these Uyghurs, we're providing them with jobs, we're educating them. We have billionaires, we have doctors, we have scientists, we have scholars from all parts of our society, people who have PhDs who don't need vocational training, who are being sent into these camps. And many of our key scholars, whether it's religious scholars or cultural leaders, many of them have died in the camps. And China says that, they died of, the China doesn't tell us what the reason that they died. The few instances where they said they died from tuberculosis.
Yeah. On top of all the gross injustices that have happened there, the fact that they're kind of separated from the rest of the world and no one can talk to them and no one ever hears about them makes it extra frustrating, like really enraging. And so when you have your own family members saying, "Oh my God, don't call me," that of course what that means is, and I've heard this from other Uyghurs as well, that the minute the Chinese government thinks that they're communicating with someone in America, they're goners. They're going into camps, and so then it makes them reject their own family members. Like, no, I don't know them. I don't want to talk to them, etc. Because it's a one-way ticket to a concentration camp. And so it's really heartbreaking and unreal what's happening there. All right, now tell me about the government in exile. What is that? How did it form?
So the East Turkestan government in exile was officially formed in 2004 to continue the fight for East Turkestan's independence and national self-determination. Prior to that, we had the East Turkestan National Congress, or the National Committee, and it was based out of Central Asia. Briefly before the Central Asian governments, because of their ties with China and the SCO, they banned any form of East Turkestani or Uyghur political or otherwise even human rights advocacy in Central Asia. Turkey also did the same thing, and so our leaders in 2004, our predecessors, they were able to find some opportunity here in the United States where there's freedom to engage in political and human rights advocacy without any country or any government telling you can't do that.
Okay, tell me about and that makes sense. You were earlier, you were voted prime minister, and now you're the foreign and security minister, right?
Yes, in 2019, I was as part of because of my advocacy in igniting attention to the Uyghur genocide and igniting our youth across the global diaspora to engage in similar activism in their host nations. Our people felt that they nominated me for the position to run for prime minister. I had no intention to do that. So elections are held every 4 years, where our diaspora communities, every host country elects representatives to send to our parliament in exile to represent them in our parliament in exile, and then the parliament in exile elects the government leadership. So I briefly served from 2019 to 2023 as the prime minister, and then in 2023 November, I was appointed by the new government leadership as the foreign minister.
And you used to live in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Oklahoma. I spent most of my life, I would say, I'd spent in Oklahoma before I moved up to Washington, D.C. to advocate for my people.
Yeah. So it is amazing that the government in exile for East Turkestan was in Oklahoma for a while. So that's
no. Our government in exile was always based in Washington D.C. It was formed in Washington D.C. It was based in Washington D.C. I just at the 8th General Assembly. That's when I was elected.
Yeah, I should have said more accurately that the foreign and security minister for East Turkestan lived in Oklahoma, grew up in Oklahoma, but you did live there when you were younger and moved to 7. All right, last things here. I'm talking about the forced marriages. I've had stories told to me by other Uyghurs that they're taking the Uyghur women, the Turkic women, and after they move the men into the camps, the Turkic men, they're forcing them into marrying Chinese husbands and not allowing the kids to learn the Turkic language, so the kids then think that they're completely Chinese and forget that their Turkic past even existed, their identity even existed. Now that I heard that from someone who was not in the government in exile. How true is that? Do you have more about that phenomenon?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, unfortunately. In fact, as part of the ongoing genocidal campaign that the Chinese government started, they had a policy where they sent, according again this to the Chinese government itself, they sent over 2 million Chinese government officials to the homes of Uyghurs to live with us as so-called relatives. And many of these homes, the men are taken. So you have, you might have even seen images and videos of this. The Chinese government male officials, they're sleeping with our women underneath, the same covers, and they're promoting our women, trying to get Chinese men from other parts of China to come to East Turkestan, saying that if you move to what they call the new territory or the colony, we will provide you job opportunities. We'll provide you an ethnic wife. All these things are true. In reality, what this is, Cenk, is that this is state-sponsored mass rape. That's what it is. It's not just forced marriages. It's the state-sponsored mass rape of our women. And when it comes to our children, I mean, not only are they forcing our children to, forget their culture, their language, their identity, they are forcibly separating our children. Again, the Chinese government's own data shows that up until 2019, they separated over 890,000 Uyghur children and put them up in so-called state-run orphanages and boarding schools. And if you look at the few journalists that were able to get anywhere near these facilities, that there's police forces and security forces, Chinese security forces, preventing them from coming near this. And there's high walls, barbed wires, and even watchtowers. So essentially, what it is indoctrination camps for children. And then you see Chinese social media, where our children, our Uyghur children, are dressed up in little miniature Chinese People's Liberation Army uniforms, and they're forced to, sing these oaths, loyalty to China, and that they will fight against, the so-called terrorists, again, their own people. This is what's happening. I mean, our identity is not only our identity is being stripped, but our future is being taken from us.
Yeah, the reason why this genocide is particularly haunting is because they're systematically trying to erase the identity altogether so that people forget who they were and think that they're Chinese, a different people now. And that is That is amazing. Try to wipe out an identity off the map in modern day, planet Earth.
Well,
it's unbelievable.
It's not just our identity that they're trying to wipe out. They're trying to physically wipe us out as well. This is why they forcibly sterilized over 300,000 of our women. The Chinese government itself, the Chinese state media stated that they prevented 3.7 million illegal births between 1989 and 2009, and post 2009, when the genocide has ramped up. You bet they forcibly sterilized forcibly aborted many more children of our unborn babies. So they're killing off a part of our population through torture, through organ harvesting. They're enslaving our youth, our men, if not, and they're dying, in slow but surely they're dying, whether it's through torture, whether it's through organ harvesting, etc. Our children are being taken away from us. Our women are being forced to, essentially they're being systematically raped, and to where the Chinese are trying to essentially breed us out. And what their goal is, within the next coming decades or two, they want to reduce us to a so-called manageable size, to where we truly become a minority in our own country, to where within 50 years there's nothing left of us.
Yeah, wow, it's brutal. And so last thing is, what if anything can people do to help fight back against this?
Well, one is to learn more about this. Just Google Uyghurs, Google East Turkestan. Urge our members of parliament to, vote, members of Congress to, pass the Uyghur Policy Act. There are a couple of bills in Congress that need to be passed, and they're stalling on it, which is ridiculous. And we also need to, call on, our government. Whether it's Secretary Rubio, who was the champion of the Uyghurs when he was in the Senate. Now he's completely silent. President Trump, he claims to be tough on China, yet he's, handing China a trade deal at the expense of, millions of Uyghurs who continue to be enslaved and kept in these concentration camps and prisons.
Yeah. All right, Salih Hudayar, he is the Foreign and Security Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. Thank you for bringing us this story and bringing awareness to it, and for fighting back in any way that you can. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.